The return of sacred motivation. When authentic motivation returns, and it will, it won't feel like your old drive. The difference is so profound that many people initially don't recognize it as motivation at all. They expect the familiar urgency, the adrenaline rush, the sense of pushing against resistance. Instead, they experience something that feels more like gravity, a natural pull toward what wants to happen. This new motivation will be effortless rather than effortful. You won't have to psych yourself up or push through resistance. Action will feel more like following a current than swimming upstream. You'll find yourself naturally drawn towards certain activities without having to convince yourself why they're worthwhile and sustainable rather than depleting. Instead of the boom and bust cycles of ego-driven motivation, you'll experience a steady flow of energy that replenishes itself through use. Work won't feel like work in the old sense. It will feel like play, like expression, like a natural extension of who you are, aligned rather than forced. Every action will feel like it's coming from your core rather than from external pressure. You'll know with your whole being that you're moving in the right direction, even when the logical mind can't explain why. Creative rather than reactive. Instead of responding to what the world demands from you, you'll be creating from what wants to emerge through you. Your life becomes less about solving problems and more about expressing possibilities. Service-oriented rather than self-seeking. Paradoxically, when you stop trying to get something for yourself, you naturally become a conduit for something larger than yourself. You'll find yourself moved to create, to heal, to serve, not because you should, but because you can't not. Present-focused rather than future-focused. The old motivation was always reaching toward some imagined future state. The new motivation is rooted in the aliveness of this moment, in what's authentic right now. You'll find yourself moved to create, to heal, to serve, to build, to love, not because you should, but because you can't not. It becomes as natural as breathing, as inevitable as water flowing downhill. But here's what might surprise you. This new form of motivation is often more effective than the old one. When you're aligned with your authentic nature, you stop wasting energy on resistance. You stop second-guessing yourself. You stop creating from scarcity and start creating from abundance. Projects that once felt overwhelming become manageable. Relationships that required effort become effortless. Work that felt like work becomes play. Not because everything becomes easier, but because you're no longer fighting against yourself. This is what Jung meant when he wrote about the transcendent function, the psyche's ability to bridge opposites and find a third way that includes and transcends both. In this case, the opposites are action and being, doing and allowing, personal will and cosmic will. The transcendent function doesn't choose between motivation and emptiness. It reveals them as different phases of the same natural cycle. Like inhalation and exhalation, like winter and spring. Common misconceptions about sacred motivation. As soul will begins to emerge, it's important to distinguish it from several common misconceptions. It's not always blissful. Sacred motivation doesn't mean you'll feel high vibe and positive all the time. You might be called to difficult conversations, challenging creative projects, or healing work that brings up pain. The difference is that even difficult actions feel aligned when they're coming from your authentic center. It's not passive. Some people misinterpret the end of ego-driven striving as a call to complete inaction. But soul will can be incredibly dynamic. It might call you to start a business, write a book, have a difficult conversation, or make a major life change. The difference is the quality of energy behind the action. It's not selfish. When you're operating from authentic motivation, you naturally serve the larger whole. This isn't because you're trying to be good or spiritual. It's because your individual authenticity is connected to the collective well-being in ways the ego can't understand. It's not always logical. Soul will operates by a different logic than the rational mind. You might find yourself drawn to learning skills that don't obviously connect to your career, or feeling called to have conversations that don't seem strategically beneficial. Trust the deeper intelligence that's orchestrating these impulses. It doesn't eliminate uncertainty. Even when you're following your authentic motivation, you won't always know where it's leading. The difference is that uncertainty feels like adventure rather than anxiety when you're aligned with your deeper nature. The shadow side of the sacred pause. While I've been speaking about the post-awakening emptiness as a sacred process, and I believe it is, it's important to acknowledge that this phase also has its shadow aspects that need to be navigated skillfully. Spiritual bypassing can masquerade as sacred emptiness. If you're using your awakening as an excuse to avoid responsibility, difficult emotions, or necessary action, you may be stuck in a form of sophisticated avoidance rather than genuine transformation. Depression and spiritual emptiness can overlap. While they're different phenomena, they can coexist. If your emptiness is accompanied by persistent hopelessness, thoughts of self-harm, or inability to function in basic ways, please seek professional support alongside your spiritual process. Spiritual superiority can develop during this phase. When you see through certain illusions, it's easy to feel like you're more evolved than people who are still caught in the matrix. This is the ego co-opting the awakening experience to feel special. Existential drift can become a comfortable hiding place. Some people get so accustomed to the liminal space that they resist moving into emergence. The unknown becomes familiar, and familiar becomes comfortable, even when it's no longer serving growth. Analysis paralysis can masquerade as spiritual patience. While it's important not to rush the process, it's also important to distinguish between sacred timing and fear-based procrastination. The key is developing discernment about which of these you might be experiencing and adjusting accordingly. This is where having support, whether through therapy, spiritual direction, or community, becomes invaluable. The ripple effects of authentic transformation. When you successfully navigate the post-awakening emptiness and begin operating from soul will, the effects extend far beyond your personal experience. Jung understood that individual transformation is never just individual. It affects the collective unconscious in ways we're only beginning to understand. Your relationships change. You become less available for drama, manipulation, and superficial connection. This can be challenging at first, as some relationships may not survive your transformation. But the relationships that remain become deeper, more authentic, and more nourishing. Your work transforms. Even if you stay in the same job, the way you approach work changes. You become less driven by external validation and more focused on intrinsic value. This often leads to higher quality output with less stress. Your presence becomes medicine. When you're no longer performing a version of yourself, your authentic presence becomes healing for others. People feel permission to be more real around you because you're being real yourself. You become a bridge between worlds. Having navigated the transition from ego consciousness to soul consciousness, you can help others who are going through similar processes. Your very existence becomes proof that transformation is possible. You contribute to collective healing. Every person who does their inner work and lives authentically helps heal the collective unconscious. Your individual transformation contributes to humanity's overall evolution toward greater consciousness and integration. The sacred emptiness. Why your soul went silent after awakening. Opening hook. You finally broke free from the matrix of illusion. You saw through the game, pierced the veil, touched something real and eternal. The spiritual books promised this would be the beginning of your most inspired life. The teachers spoke of liberation, of endless energy, of purpose so clear it would pull you forward like gravity. So why does everything feel hollow? Why do you sit in silence, watching the world spin, while you feel like you're observing from behind glass? Why does the fire that once drove you feel like cold ash? Why do your old dreams feel like costumes that no longer fit? You wake up each morning and the first thought isn't excitement, it's a quiet, persistent question. What's the point? Not in a suicidal way, not in a clinical depression way, but in a cosmic, existential way that no amount of positive thinking can touch. The goals that once electrified you now feel like someone else's homework. The career ladder you were climbing suddenly looks like a treadmill to nowhere. Even your spiritual practices, the meditation, the journaling, the conscious breathing, feel like going through the motions of a ritual whose meaning has evaporated. This isn't spiritual failure. This is spiritual metamorphosis. And Carl Jung knew exactly why this happens, though he warned that our culture would misunderstand it completely. The paradox of post-awakening emptiness. There's something no one tells you about spiritual awakening. It doesn't light you up, it burns you down. Not in destruction, but in sacred dissolution. The great irony is that seeing the truth doesn't set you free, it sets you adrift. I know someone who spent years in the spiritual seeking game. Meditation retreats, plant medicine ceremonies, energy healings, breath work, every workshop and teacher you could imagine. She was what you'd call a spiritual overachiever, collecting insights like trophies, always reaching for the next level of consciousness. Then one day, during a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning meditation, something cracked open. Not a dramatic mystical experience, no white lights or angelic choirs, just a quiet, undeniable recognition. She saw it all, the endless wanting, the performance, the desperate seeking for external validation disguised as spiritual growth. The relief was profound, the burden of becoming finally lifted. She described it like stepping out of a room she didn't know she was trapped in. Suddenly, she could see the futility of the rat race, the absurdity of social media metrics, the hollowness of achievement-based self-worth. She felt liberated, expanded, truly awake for the first time in her adult life. But 6 months later, she called me, crying. Not tears of joy or spiritual bliss, tears of confusion and a deep, aching emptiness. I can't get out of bed, she said. I understand everything now, but I don't want anything. I used to be so driven, so passionate about my work, my relationships, my goals. Now I feel like I'm watching my life through someone else's eyes. I thought awakening would make me more alive, not less. This is the paradox no spiritual teacher prepared her for. The moment you see through the illusion of the game, you can no longer play it with the same enthusiasm. But you're still here, still human, still needing to function in a world that operates by rules you no longer believe in. Carl Jung would have recognized this immediately. He called it the negredo, the blackening phase of psychological transformation, the death that precedes rebirth. But unlike modern spirituality's promise of instant enlightenment, Jung understood that real transformation is messy, slow, and often looks like failure from the outside. He warned that our culture would pathologize this phase, try to medicate it, rush through it, or spiritually bypass it. But he insisted this sacred emptiness wasn't a problem to be solved. It was a cocoon to be honored. Why your motivation system collapsed. Here's what's really happening in the deepest levels of your psyche. Your entire motivational architecture was built on a foundation of becoming. Becoming successful, becoming loved, becoming worthy, becoming enlightened, becoming enough. But awakening reveals the cosmic joke. You already are what you've been trying to become. The very seeking was the problem. The very effort to improve yourself was based on the false premise that you were fundamentally lacking something. This realization doesn't just shift your perspective. It demolishes the entire structure of how you've organized your life. Imagine you've been running a marathon your entire life, believing the finish line held your salvation, only to discover you've been running in circles in your own backyard. The relief is immense, but so is the disorientation. The ego, suddenly unemployed, doesn't know what to do with itself. It's like an actor who's been playing the same character for decades, only to discover the script was written by someone else entirely. The role that once felt so important, the achiever, the seeker, the one who had to prove their worth, suddenly feels like an elaborate costume you can't remember putting on. Jung understood that most human motivation comes from what he called the complex unconscious patterns that drive us toward completion of unfinished psychological business. We achieve to heal our wounded inner child who never felt good enough. We seek approval to silence our inner critic who learned to survive through external validation. We accumulate possessions, experiences, and even spiritual insights to fill an inner void that was created not by lack, but by the false belief that we were separate from wholeness to begin with. These complexes are incredibly powerful. They can drive someone to build empires, write symphonies, or dedicate their life to service. But they're also exhausting because they're based on a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of human worth. When these patterns become conscious through awakening, they lose their grip. It's not that they disappear entirely, they're still there, like software running in the background, but they no longer have the power to compel you. The puppet strings are cut. And for a while, you don't know how to move without them. This is why so many people report feeling unmotivated after awakening experiences. It's not that their life force has diminished, it's that the engine that was driving them has been revealed to be powered by illusion. And you can't unknow what you know. The old fuel, fear of not being enough, desperate need for approval, scarcity-based thinking, future-focused anxiety, no longer works. But the new fuel hasn't come online yet. You're in the space between dying and being reborn, and that space has its own strange physics. The 3 stages of post-awakening emptiness. Through my years of working with people navigating this terrain and drawing from Jung's maps of psychological transformation, I've identified 3 distinct stages that most people move through after an awakening experience. Understanding where you are can help you trust the process rather than fight it. Stage 1. The Great Disillusionment. This is where it begins, not with depression but with discrimination. Everything that once mattered feels like elaborate theater. Your career goals, your relationship dynamics, your social media presence, even your spiritual practices. All of it seems suddenly superficial, like watching actors perform in a play you've already seen 100 times. You sit in meetings and wonder why everyone is so invested in outcomes that feel fundamentally meaningless. You scroll through social media and feel bewildered by the emotional investment people have in digital validation. You watch friends stress about things that once stressed you too, and you feel like you're observing from another planet. This isn't superiority. It's actually quite isolating. You haven't become better than others. You've simply stepped outside a shared hallucination. And once you're outside, you can't pretend to be inside anymore, even if it would make social situations easier. Jung called this the transcendent function beginning to operate, the psyche's ability to see patterns from a higher vantage point. But transcendence can be lonely, especially when you're the only one in your circle who's experiencing it. During this stage, you might find yourself losing interest in conversations that once engaged you, feeling disconnected from your old friend groups, questioning the value of pursuits that consume others, experiencing a strange clarity about the futility of certain human behaviors, feeling like you're living in 2 worlds simultaneously. This isn't depression, it's discrimination. Your soul has developed exquisite taste and refuses to accept anything inauthentic. Like a wine connoisseur who can no longer enjoy cheap wine, your consciousness has been refined to the point where it can't pretend to find meaning in what it knows to be hollow. Stage 2. The Sacred Pause. After the disillusionment comes something even more challenging, what I call the cosmic waiting room. You're not who you were, but you don't know who you're becoming. The old identity has dissolved, but a new one hasn't crystallized yet. This is where most people panic. Jung called this the liminal space, the threshold between death and rebirth. Ancient cultures had elaborate rituals for this phase, vision quests, initiation ceremonies, periods of isolation, where the initiate would die to their old self and be reborn into their new role in the community. We have Netflix and anxiety. Our culture has no container for this process, no understanding of its necessity, no support for its timeline. Instead, we're expected to maintain productivity, keep up appearances, and figure it out quickly. But the psyche doesn't operate on corporate timelines. During this stage, you might experience a profound sense of floating or drifting through life, difficulty making decisions, even small ones, a feeling of watching your life happen rather than living it, and about what you actually want, as opposed to what you think you should want, a strange peace mixed with disorientation, dreams that feel more real than waking life, moments of panic about wasting time, trust in the process, alternating with fear that you're broken. This is where most people try to force their way back to their old life. They take action-ended approaches, goal setting, vision boards, productivity systems, trying to manufacture motivation. But these attempts usually feel forced and unsustainable because they're trying to power a new operating system with old software. Jung understood that this phase can't be rushed. The psyche is undergoing a fundamental reorganization, like a computer updating its operating system. You wouldn't try to run intensive programs during a system update. You'd let the process complete itself. The sacred pause isn't a bug in your spiritual development. It's a feature. It's your soul's way of ensuring that what emerges next is authentically you, not just a shinier version of your old patterns. Stage 3. The emergence of authentic will. Eventually, and this timing is unique for everyone, something new begins to stir, not the frantic energy of the ego, but what Jung called the transcendent function, the bridge between consciousness and the unconscious, between who you were and who you're becoming. This emergence is subtle at first. You might notice towards certain activities or ideas. Moments of genuine curiosity that feel different from old interests. A capacity to act without needing to know all the outcomes. Decision-making that feels intuitive rather than analytical. Creative impulses that surprise you. A willingness to say no without elaborate justifications. Actions that feel aligned even when they don't make logical sense. This new motivation doesn't scream, it whispers. It doesn't demand, it invites. It doesn't promise anything except authenticity, which turns out to be enough. The energy that emerges from this phase is qualitatively different from ego-driven motivation. It's sustainable, generative, and surprisingly effective, not because it's trying to be, but because it's aligned with something deeper than personal will. The difference between ego will and soul will. To understand why motivation disappears after awakening and what replaces it, we need to understand the fundamental difference between two types of will, what I call ego will and soul will. Jung touched on this distinction throughout his work, though he used different terminology at different times. Ego is driven by lack, fear, and the need to become something other than what you are. It says, I must do this to become worthy, to be safe, to be loved, to prove myself, to avoid rejection, to maintain my image, to get ahead, to not fall behind. Ego will is incredibly powerful. It can drive someone to work 80-hour weeks, to sacrifice their health for success, to build impressive achievements, to accumulate wealth and status. But it's also exhausting, because it's powered by anxiety. It's like running a race where the finish line keeps moving further away. No matter how much you achieve, the underlying sense of not enough remains. This type of motivation is also inherently unsustainable because it's based on resistance to what is. You're constantly fighting against your current reality to create a different one. Even when you succeed, the success is tainted by the fear of losing what you've gained. Soul will, on the other hand, is driven by fullness, love, and the impulse to express what already is. It says, this wants to be expressed through me. This feels alive. This serves something greater than my personal agenda. This is what wants to happen. Soul will doesn't need to be motivated in the traditional sense because it's not trying to get anywhere or become anything. It's already whole and is simply seeking expression. It's like water flowing downhill. Not because it's trying to reach the bottom, but because that's its natural movement. This type of will is sustainable because it's aligned with the natural flow of life rather than fighting against it. It's also more effective in the long run because it's not depleting your life force, it's channeling it. The transition between these two types of will is what creates the motivational desert you're wandering through after awakening. Your old fuel doesn't work anymore, but your new fuel system hasn't fully come online yet. Think of it like this. Imagine you've been driving a car that runs on anxiety and external validation for your entire adult life. Suddenly, you wake up and realize this fuel is not only toxic, it's also an illusion. The car stops running. You're not broken, you just need to learn to operate on a completely different energy source. But here's the tricky part. Soul will can't be manufactured or forced. It emerges naturally when the ego stops trying to control everything. It's like trying to force yourself to fall asleep. The very effort prevents the thing you're trying to achieve. This is why traditional goal setting and motivation techniques often backfire after an awakening experience. They're designed for the ego will system, not the soul will system. It's like trying to start a hybrid car by pouring gasoline directly into the electric motor. The challenge is that our entire culture is organized around ego will. Our educational systems, our economic structures, our social media platforms, everything is designed to reward and reinforce the not enough story that powers traditional motivation. When you can no longer access that fuel source, you feel like you're speaking a different language than everyone around you. They're asking, how can you get more motivated? And you're wondering, what if motivation itself is the problem? Jung understood that this transition is necessary for what he called individuation, the process of becoming who you actually are rather than who you think you should be. But he also recognized that this process requires patience, trust, and a willingness to live in the unknown for longer than the ego finds comfortable. What Jung would tell you right now: if Carl Jung was sitting across from you today, observing your post-awakening emptiness with those penetrating eyes that saw straight through to the soul, I believe he would lean forward and say something like this: "My friend, you're not broken, you're not failing, you're not behind schedule or off track. You're in the most sacred phase of human development, the death of the false self and the birth of the authentic self. What you're experiencing is not pathology, it's transformation. Your emptiness isn't a void to be filled with more activities, more goals, more purposes. It's a womb where something unprecedented is being formed, and like any gestation process, it has its own timing that cannot be rushed. The ego mourns its lost importance. Of course it does. It's been the director of your life for decades, and suddenly it's being demoted to an advisory role. Let it grieve. Meanwhile, listen deeper. Beneath the silence, your soul is composing a new song. You've been asking the wrong question. You've been asking, how do I get my motivation back? When you should be asking, what is trying to be born through this emptiness? Your culture will not understand this process. It will try to pathologize your pause, medicate your mystery, and rush your rebirth. It has no tolerance for the sacred timing of the psyche. But transformation is not efficient. It's thorough. What you're experiencing is what I call the coniunctio, the sacred marriage between conscious and unconscious, between who you were and who you're becoming. This union doesn't happen in your head. It happens in the depths of your being. In the same place where seeds know how to become trees without taking classes in botany. Stop trying to think your way through this. Stop trying to understand it with the same mind that created the problem. This is a felt experience, a body knowing, a soul process that bypasses the intellect entirely. Your unconscious is not your enemy. It's your deepest ally, and it's been waiting your entire life for this moment when you would finally be quiet enough to hear its whispers. What you call lack of motivation is actually the unconscious saying, finally, you're ready to listen to what I've been trying to tell you. Trust the intelligence that brought you this far. Trust the process that knows how to transform caterpillars into butterflies without their conscious participation. Trust that your soul knows what it's doing, even when, especially when your mind. This isn't the end of your story. This is the comma in the middle of a sentence that's being rewritten by forces far wiser than your personality. And what emerges on the other side won't just be a more motivated version of who you were. It will be who you truly are, finally free to express itself in the world. I believe Jung would also remind you that individuation, becoming who you actually are, is not a luxury or a self-indulgent spiritual hobby. It's your primary responsibility as a human being. Not just for your own fulfillment, but for the world itself. When you live from your authentic nature, you stop contributing to the collective unconsciousness that keeps humanity trapped in cycles of fear, competition, and meaninglessness. Your very presence becomes a bridge between the conscious and unconscious worlds, a living example that transformation is possible. This is why your emptiness matters. It's not just personal healing. It's evolutionary pressure pushing consciousness itself toward greater integration and wholeness. Practical guidance for the sacred emptiness. While the process of post-awakening transformation can't be rushed, there are ways to work with it skillfully rather than against it. These aren't techniques to fix your emptiness. They're ways to honor the process while supporting your psyche through this vulnerable transition. 1. Stop trying to get your motivation back. This might sound counterintuitive, but the fastest way to prolong your emptiness is to fight it. Your old motivation isn't coming back because it was based on illusion. Trying to resurrect it is like trying to get excited about a movie you've already seen and know is fake. Instead of asking, how do I get motivated? Try asking, what is this emptiness teaching me? Or, What wants to emerge from this stillness? The old motivation was powered by should energy. What you should want, should achieve, should become. The new motivation will be powered by is energy. What is authentic? What is alive? What is true for you in this moment? Practice releasing the timeline. Your ego wants to know when this will be over, when you'll feel normal again, when you'll have clarity about your next steps. But transformation doesn't operate on schedules, it operates on readiness. 2. Embrace the sacred no. During this phase, your soul is developing an exquisite capacity for discernment. If something doesn't resonate, don't do it. Even if it makes logical sense, even if others expect it, even if it's what the old you would have wanted. This sacred no isn't rebellion or laziness. It's your soul protecting the space where your authentic yes is germinating. Every time you honor your no, you're saying yes to the deeper process happening within you. This might mean declining social invitations that feel draining, skipping back from projects that no longer align, ending conversations that feel superficial, saying no to opportunities that look good on paper but feel hollow in your body, releasing relationships that require you to perform a version of yourself that no longer exists. Remember, boundaries aren't walls, they're semi-permeable membranes that let in what nourishes and filter out what depletes. 3. Follow the subtle yes. While you're developing your no, pay attention to what creates even the slightest spark of aliveness. Not excitement. That's often ego energy. But quiet resonance, gentle curiosity, soft expansion. This might be a book title that catches your attention, a conversation topic that makes you lean in slightly, an activity that you find yourself naturally gravitating toward, a person whose presence feels nourishing, a creative impulse that whispers rather than shouts, a way of being that feels more authentic. These subtle yeses are breadcrumbs leading you toward your emerging authentic self. They might not make sense to your logical mind, but your soul recognizes them as true north. Follow them without needing to know where they lead. Let yourself be curious without needing to be certain. 4. Practice presencing. Instead of asking, what should I do? Learn to ask, what is present right now? This simple shift moves you from the future-focused anxiety of the ego to the grounded awareness of the soul. Presencing practices include feeling into your body throughout the day, noticing the quality of your breath without trying to change it, observing your environment with fresh eyes, listening to the sounds around you as if hearing them for the first time, paying attention to what emotions are moving through you without judgment. The goal isn't to feel better, it's to feel more accurately, to develop a relationship with what's actually happening rather than what you think should be happening. 5. Trust the timing. You're not behind schedule because there is no schedule. Your soul doesn't operate on corporate timelines or social media algorithms. It operates on organic timing that takes into account factors your conscious mind can't see. Some transformations happen quickly, others take years. Some people move through the post-awakening emptiness in months. Others need longer. Your timing is your timing, and it's perfect for your unique process. Stop comparing your inner timeline to others' outer timelines. Stop measuring your progress against productivity metrics. Stop treating your spiritual development like a project with deadlines. Instead, practice trusting the intelligence that brought you this far. Trust that your psyche knows what it's doing even when your mind doesn't understand the plan. 6. Create sacred space. Your emptiness needs container, physical, emotional, and energetic space where the transformation can happen safely. This might mean creating a physical space in your home that feels sacred, setting boundaries around your time and energy, finding or creating community with others who understand this process, working with a therapist or spiritual director who can hold space for your experience, developing rituals that honor the transition you're in. This isn't about creating another spiritual practice to perform. It's about creating conditions where your authentic self feels safe to emerge. 7. Honor the grief. Part of what you're experiencing is grief for the life you thought you wanted, the identity you thought you were, the future you thought you were building. This grief is sacred and necessary. Let yourself mourn the simplicity of your old motivations, the certainty of your old identity, the clarity of your old goals, the version of yourself that felt so sure about everything. This grief isn't a sign that you've made a mistake. It's a sign that something real is dying, so that something truer can be born. The return of sacred motivation. When authentic motivation returns, and it will, it won't feel like your old drive. It will be effortless rather than effortful, rather than depleting, aligned rather than forced, creative rather than reactive, service-oriented rather than self-circing. You'll find yourself moved to create, to heal, to serve, not because you should, but because you can't not. It becomes as natural as breathing, a message for those in the void. If you're in the sacred emptiness right now, reading these words while feeling that familiar ache of purposelessness, I want you to know something. You're not broken. You're not behind. You're not failing at spirituality or life or anything else. You're incubating. The caterpillar doesn't try to become a butterfly. It doesn't read books about transformation or attend workshops on wing development. It surrenders so completely to the process that dissolution becomes inevitable. And from that dissolution, something unprecedented emerges. But here's what the caterpillar metaphor doesn't capture. You're still conscious during your transformation. You're aware of the dissolution, aware of the emptiness, aware of the not knowing. This is both the blessing and the burden of human transformation. We get to witness our own metamorphosis. Your soul knows what it's doing, even when your mind doesn't. There's an intelligence operating in your psyche that's far older and wiser than your personality. And it's been orchestrating this process long before your conscious mind caught up to what was happening. The emptiness isn't punishment for awakening, it's preparation for becoming. It's your soul clearing space for something that has never existed before, the unique expression of consciousness that only you can bring into the world. This process can't be optimized, outsourced, or fast-tracked. It has its own organic timeline that takes into account factors your conscious mind can't see. Your job isn't to speed it up or figure it out. Your job is to trust it. Stop measuring your transformation against other people's highlight reels. Stop comparing your inner experience to others' outer expressions. Stop treating your spiritual development like a race you're losing. Instead, practice radical self-compassion. Practice patience with the process. Practice trust in the intelligence that brought you this far. Remember that every spiritual tradition has stories of the dark night of the soul, the desert wandering, the time of emptiness that precedes rebirth. You're not the first person to feel lost after finding truth. You won't be the last. And perhaps most importantly, you don't have to know what comes next. You don't have to have a plan or a vision or a 5-year strategy. All you have to do is stay present to what's actually happening right now, trust the process that's unfolding, and remain open to what wants to emerge. The void you're in isn't empty, it's pregnant with possibility. Living the questions. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote, "Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer." This wisdom is particularly relevant for those navigating post-awakening emptiness. Instead of trying to answer the question, "What should I do with my life?" try living the question, "What wants to emerge through me?" Instead of demanding clarity about your purpose, try being curious about what's alive in this moment. The questions themselves become a form of prayer, a way of staying open to the mystery while honoring the not knowing. They become companions on the journey rather than problems to be solved. Some questions worth living. What is this emptiness teaching me? How can I be more present to what's actually happening? What would it look like to trust this process completely? What small yes is available to me right now? How can I serve while still honoring my own process? What would love do in this situation? What is my soul calling me toward? These aren't questions to be answered once and filed away. They're living inquiries that evolve as you evolve, deepening your relationship with the mystery of your own becoming. Closing. The phoenix doesn't rise despite the ashes. Carl Jung spent his life mapping the territory of human transformation, not because he was an academic observer, but because he was a fellow traveler on the path toward wholeness. He knew intimately the dark nights of the soul, the periods of emptiness, the times when meaning dissolved and left only questions in its wake. What he discovered, and what he tried to share with the world, is that these dark passages aren't detours from the spiritual path. They are the path. They're not obstacles to overcome, but initiations to honor. They're not problems to be solved, but mysteries to be lived. The post-awakening emptiness you're experiencing isn't a sign that something went wrong with your spiritual development. It's a sign that something is going profoundly right. You're not broken, you're breaking open. You're not lost, you're being found by a deeper part of yourself that you didn't know existed. Jung understood that real transformation requires a kind of death. The death of who we thought we were, the death of our old motivations, the death of our familiar identity. But death in service of truth isn't tragedy. It's the most courageous act a human being can perform. You didn't lose your motivation, you outgrew it. And what's emerging from the ashes isn't just a new drive, it's a new way of being human. A way that's rooted in authenticity rather than performance, in presence rather than achievement, in service rather than self-aggrandizement. This transformation you're undergoing is needed not just for your own fulfillment, but for the world itself. Every person who does the deep work of individuation, who moves from ego consciousness to soul consciousness, contributes to the collective healing that our planet desperately needs. When you operate from your authentic center, you give others permission to do the same. When you trust the process of your own becoming, you model possibility for those who are still trapped in the old paradigms of striving and achieving. Your emptiness is temporary. Your transformation is permanent. The void you're sitting in isn't a dead end. It's a cocoon. And what emerges from this cocoon won't just be a more motivated version of who you were. It will be who you actually are, finally free to express itself fully in the world. So, sit in the silence a little longer, trust the process a little deeper, and remember, the phoenix doesn't rise despite the ashes. It rises because of them. The ashes aren't the end of the story. They're the fertile ground from which new life emerges. Your soul hasn't gone silent. It's learning a new language, and when it speaks again, and it will, the world will listen, because it will be speaking truth in a world hungry for authenticity. The sacred emptiness you're experiencing is not the end of your awakening. It's the beginning of your becoming, and that becoming is exactly what the world needs right now. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you truly are." Your current emptiness is the price of admission to that privilege. It's the initiation into your authentic self, and it's worth every moment of confusion, every day of not knowing, every night of wondering what comes next. Because what comes next is you, the real you. The you that was always there beneath the masks and performances and attempts to be someone else. The you that the world has been waiting for, even if the world doesn't know it yet. Trust the process, honor the emptiness, and prepare to be amazed by what wants to be born through you. What has your experience of post-awakening emptiness been like? Have you felt that strange combination of clarity and confusion, of seeing through illusions while feeling purposeless? Share your story in the comments. Your journey might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Sometimes the most healing thing we can offer each other is the simple recognition that we're not alone in this mysterious process of becoming human. If this video resonated with you, subscribe for more explorations into the psychology of awakening, the wisdom of Carl Jung, and the beautiful, messy process of spiritual transformation. And remember, the void isn't empty, it's pregnant with possibility. Your emptiness isn't a problem to be solved, it's a mystery to be lived. And you're exactly where you need to be,